Hello, good morning. I hope that you're all well and that you've had a good week. It's a beautiful day in Cornwall again. We've been very lucky this week with the weather. It's just so nice to have that sunshine after the winter. The winter this year, it was a wet winter and it seemed to go on a long time. This sunshine, it sort of lifts your spirits. During the week, I posted on Facebook some photographs of a few of the sample walls I have in my home. I'm just going to insert some of those photographs into the video. The first photographs are of my red room, which is our downstairs loo. A loo is a lavatory, a water closet, a powder room. It's somewhere where we go to the toilet, or our guests, our visitors to our home, use in our home. When people go in that room, they tend to be in there a long time looking at the samplers. Now, the photographs I posted generated an awful lot of emails, and I think that people enjoyed looking at the photographs, zooming in, studying some of the samplers. And yes, there are several samplers that have not been released. They will all eventually be released. It's just time getting round to them. My red room, I showed 2 walls in that room. I'm busy building the 3rd wall, which is the largest expansive wall to fill in that room. And, I'm concentrating on charting and stitching red samplers. Some of the other photographs are from a few of the samplers that I have in our family room, and a handful of samplers that are in what I call my working kitchen. I've got a kitchen and I've got a breakfast room plus sort of like a utility area as well. I like having my samplers around my home in places that maybe I spend a little bit of time with. This sampler, Eliza Knight, actually sits on a wall near where my kettle is. And don't go, oh, kettle. It never steams up. There's lots of ventilation. And at the end of the day, I stitch this sampler to enjoy for myself. And I love looking at it whilst I'm waiting for the kettle to boil. Sometimes I don't even hear the kettle click off, so I'm so engrossed in the sampler. Eliza Knight, to me, is everything a schoolgirl, oh God, my back is so bad at the moment, is everything a schoolgirl sampler should be. And this sampler actually has 2 of my favourite verses. Jesus, permit thy gracious name to stand as the first efforts of an infant's hand. And there's variations on that verse. And remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth. I love this sampler so much. It's available on the Hands Across the Sea Samplers website as a printed booklet. I had great pleasure stitching this sampler, but this sampler doesn't just represent pleasure. This sampler, I stitched it quite a few years ago. I stitched it at a difficult time for myself. Ray and I were going through a grieving process at the time, and I must admit there were many tears shed in the early hours of the morning when I was working on this sampler. But Eliza was my friend, and she helped me through part of my grieving process. I also took Eliza with me on a cruise, and those are the happy memories of stitching Eliza. Just on the deck of the cruise ship. I think it was a Caribbean cruise. I can't quite remember that. I'd have to check back through my journal. Samplers are funny things. It's just like, you can place a song through, or you can remember something that was happening when you heard a certain song. For me, samplers that I stitch, I can remember what I was going through at the time. Beautiful sampler. And, it's a sampler of a vibrant but more muted colour palette. Now, one of the samplers that generated the most interest in those photographs that I posted was this one. Now, I can't pick this up at the moment. Ray had to help me get it in here. As I said, my back is not very good at the moment. But what I will do is I will insert some photographs where I, rather than have the sampler in front of the camera and lift it, I'll take the camera and film down it. This sampler I stitched many years ago. Again, I'll have to look back through my journal, but I believe this was stitched in the 90s. And this is a series of charts. There is a chart for each letter of the alphabet, except for the X, Y, Z, which was 1. So this was a Victoria sampler design, and it was called the Alphabet Series. And you could stitch these individually, or you could put them all together in one big piece. And I decided to put this sampler together as one sampler. Now, there was a lovely concept behind this sampler. Say, for example, the letter L. So L is for librarian, and there's a librarian featured in that sampler. And then all the stitches in that individual panel were stitches that began with the letter L. I just love that whole concept behind this piece. Now, because of the countless different stitches in this series, I found that it was a really good learning piece for me. And the one thing with Victoria's sampler, Thea always explained things very well in her booklets, and she had good stitch instructions and diagrams so that you could, you know, figure things out for yourself. And each time I finished a panel, I was amazed by how many new stitches that I had learnt. The panels use lots of different types of threads and materials. For example, in L for librarian, there was some ribbon embroidery in there. Most of the pieces added charms to it. I can't remember whether the ladybird beads or charms came with this or whether I added those. I did use different charms in some of the panels. The sampler, if you were going to do all of them, it worked out very expensive, because you could buy the booklet and you could buy the thread kit as well, with everything you needed to stitch the individual ones. I didn't do it that way. Well, I might have done on, say on the letter A, I might have bought the thread pack, and then I realised how expensive it was going to work out. So I decided then to try and sit down, do a spreadsheet with everything I needed, because, you know, some of the panels use the same thread. So where you might only use part of a spool for one panel, you know, you didn't need to buy another spool for another panel. And when I look at this piece, it brings back the memory of a very special lady, and her name was Yvette, and she was the manageress of So-and-so in the UK. And this was when So-and-so wasn't such a big, huge operation as it was before it was sold out to an investment company. And then it subsequently closed down, I believe. Don't know if it's reopened. But Yvette was the manageress when So-and-so was sort of transitioning from a small needlework store to this big online store on the UK. And Yvette, you could ring her up and say, Yvette, I want to stitch this. Can you help me source something or put it together? Or, you know, if this isn't available in the UK, what else can I use? And Yvette, she really helped me source all the materials, and she took a very keen interest in my progress on this piece. Unfortunately, Yvette passed away. She had breast cancer, and that was really sad. Very sad for her family, but I think it was also very sad for UK needleworkers, because she was just a wonderful person. If ever you rang her up, she never said no. She said if she didn't know, she would investigate and she would come back to you and help you with materials. Okay, so that's what that is. It's the ABC, the alphabet series from Victoria Samplers. Beautiful sampler. I often stop and look at this and study the stitches, and then I have to try and my sort of mental game with that sampler is now, what was that stitch called? Okay, this week I had an email from a lady who had watched my video last week, and her interest in samplers was piqued, and she asked me what would be a suitable sampler for a first time sampler stitcher. Now, if you want to stitch for the first time, or maybe stitch a sampler for a first time, choose something that just has cross stitch over 2 for your very first sampler. You want to make the experience as enjoyable as possible. You might find a monochrome sampler, a sampler with one colour, less expensive to kit up and slightly easier to do because you're not having to think of thread, colour changes. This lady wanted to stitch a coloured sampler, so I gave her a selection of samplers that I thought was suitable. But if somebody's wondering something, there's always somebody else. So for those people who are watching that haven't stitched a sampler before, I'm going to offer you 2 good starter projects. Now, if you like bright colours, this little sampler stitched by Charlotte Entwistle has some really lovely colours in. It's only small, but it has everything that will make a schoolgirl sampler. You have a lovely border, you have a dedication, and you have a selection of motifs, and you have a red house. You know, when I think of schoolgirl samplers, and if you had to say to me, first motif that comes to mind would always be a red house or a flower, and this one has both. That's very pretty. Charlotte is available as a printed booklet or as a PDF. And Charlotte has a sister, Margaret, which was a slightly bigger sampler. But, you know, if you go onto the website and look up Charlotte, there'll be a link to Margaret as well. So that's one sampler if you like bright colours. Another sampler, if you like a more muted palette, is Mary's Steed. Now, Mary was stitched during COVID, and I think this was the first sampler I worked on in that, you know, when that iron curtain came down of COVID. And when I framed her, I had to use what I could source. And this frame was always a little bit too big for the sampler. It would have been far better for this to have been framed with less of the unstitched fabric exposed. It would be more in keeping with how samplers were framed. And I always intended to have this reframed when my framers opened back up after the lockdowns. But do you know what? I made a decision, even though I would prefer it in a tighter frame. When I look at this, it always reminds me that this was stitched in COVID and we had to make do with what we had to hand. So anyway, Mary Steed, she's available just as a PDF booklet, but it is a very sweet sampler with beautiful muted colours, and it has such a lovely verse. Oh, love the Lord and he will be a tender father unto thee. That's a nice one. It touches the heartstrings. So those are 2 examples of samplers to stitch as first samplers. For more experienced sampler stitchers, those also make great travel projects as well. This week, I started a project. You know, I said I wanted a little project to start. Well, here is my start. I didn't get very far because other things that ended up going on in the week. So this is the little start to the sampler, and what I'm doing, I am not challenging myself, I decided that I would stitch with reversible cross stitch. If you don't use something, you lose it, and it's a little while since I stitched using reversible cross stitch. Now, dear, hold on, just a second. Just a second. This little sampler is a reproduction of this, which is really a scrap of fabric with some wool stitched motifs on there, and it's a little bit threadbare in places. But the wonderful thing about this sampler is there are so many different stitches in the sampler. You have from the simplest of running stitches to back stitch to a half stitch to herringbone stitch stitched in two different ways. You've got buttonhole stitch, you've got chain stitch, you've got treble feather stitch, you've got elongated cross stitch, you've got some, well, I don't think that's an exact stitch, you've got cross stitches with some long and short stitches coming off, you've got satin stitch that's been couched, you've got Smyrna cross, you've got now there's no eyelets in this one, which you would have expected. You've got this lovely Berlin woolwork pattern, which it creates a lace effect, and you do that by using two different thicknesses, but that is all cross stitch. Then you have buttonhole stitch again, then you have a herringbone stitch, and then you've got turkey knot. This is a great little sampler for dipping in and out of different stitches. But for me, what's really, really interesting is studying the techniques used in this sampler. The girl used a knot to start her thread, and she ended by burying the thread. So when you find where the knots are, you can see the path that she took. She actually, I can tell you that she cross-stitched, she started here, she cross-stitched to there, ended her thread, then she started again with a knot and stitched down to there, then buried her thread. And then curiously, you'd think that she would have carried on stitching down, but the knot is in the bottom. So she stitched up, which doesn't make sense to me, because I would have thought that she would have carried on that way. It's always interesting to follow the paths that the girls took to understand how they were thinking. Very, very interesting. Now, I thought that this might make an interesting piece to share with all of you, with some videos on how to work the stitches, and that's something I'm going to give a little bit more thought to when I get back from Cincinnati. If you would be interested to stitch along with this, I'll do some videos and it'll be a free workshop for Mrs. Parkman's Academy of Needlework. Let me know in the comments if you would like to stitch along with me, and then I'll post the little chart and we'll have some stitch videos on that. It's always good to learn. Never be afraid of learning new things. When you learn things, you have to understand the mechanics of the stitch. And rather than just copying a stitch diagram, think about not only what you're doing on the front, but think about the effect you're creating on the back, because what's going on in the back will automatically tell you where your needle has to go when you're stitching without a stitch diagram in front of you. If you think about it, a cross stitch is made up of two straight stitches. They're stitched on the diagonal, so you've got one stitch on the diagonal and a second one. If you think about practically every single stitch there is, not everyone, but almost everyone, they are made up of either a horizontal straight stitch, a vertical straight stitch, a diagonal straight stitch, or a elongated straight stitch. I know using straight and diagonal is odd, but I'm trying to, it's a straight vertical a single diagonal. That's maybe what I should be saying. So cross stitch, 2 diagonal stitches. If you think about Montenegrin stitch, and a lot of people go all peculiar when they think of having to stitch a Montenegrin stitch. A Montenegrin stitch is made up of a diagonal, a straight vertical, and a long diagonal. You can all do those individual legs of the stitch. It's just putting them all together. My father used to teach me as a child to break things down into bite sizes, and that's, I think, one of the tricks of mastering some of the specialty stitches, is to break them down into the most basic form. So you're breaking each leg of the stitch down, and then you're just putting them all together. And if you understand the mechanics of the stitch, you'll master it. It'll become so easy. You always know the answer to some, a question is easy if you know the answer to it. And it's the same, a stitch is easy if you know how to stitch it. I always remember when I was in school, I went to a prep school, a preparatory school. They prepared you for the entrance exam for public schools. And in the UK, a public school is actually a private fee-paying school. It's a funny sort of term. And we were sort of crammed with knowledge, and we learnt it by rote, just so that we could sit down and pass these exams to get into the upper school. And I always remember being in a maths lesson, and I just couldn't understand what the teacher was teaching us. And I remember putting my hand up and asking, "Why, sir?" And I was shot down in flames, and I went home, and when my father came home from work that day, he could see I was a bit quiet and I was upset, and he sat me down and he talked to me, and I explained what had happened, and he said to me, "Nicola," he said, "there is never a silly question, there is only ever a stupid answer." And he taught me that if I didn't know something, don't be afraid to ask. And that's something I found in the needlework world. If ever you ask somebody for help, 99.9% of the people will gladly help you. And that's how we all learn. We share our knowledge. But I think that looking back, that teacher, although that teacher seemed very old to me as a young, 10-year-old child, that actually that teacher was probably a very young teacher that didn't have experience. And I think he couldn't tell me or answer my question why, because he didn't understand. He had learnt that particular equation by rote. He hadn't thought about it himself. What I'm trying to say is that if you think about a stitch and you think, okay, so I know that stitch is made up of, say, that diagonal, that vertical, and that elongated diagonal on the front. If I also know what the stitch is made up on the back, I know that when I put my needle in the fabric on the front, where it's going to come up on the back, and that will give me my stitch path. Knowing the stitch path is so, so important. Now, I've probably gone round in circles there and explained that in a very weird way, but as Ray will say, that's how Nicola's brain works. Anyway, never worry about asking a question. When I asked Thea questions about some of those stitches, she never ever not replied. She always replied and helped me. When I asked more experienced needlework friends for help, they always help me. And that's one of the reasons why I'm always happy to help people, because you're only passing on what you yourself have been lucky enough to have had explained to you by somebody else who knew. So going back to this, if you think that you would like to have a little bit of fun stitching that, you just need a scrap of fabric and threads from your stash. I'll be very happy to post that as a free little design, and we will work our way through the stitches over the weeks. But I'm not going to post stitch instructions. I'm going to do it by stitch videos, and then what I would like you to do after you've watched the video is write your own stitch instructions, because by doing that you'll be thinking about what you see in the video. I had something come this week, and it's one of those ones you've got to give a home to. This piece had been on eBay for absolutely ages, and there were no buyers on it, there's no takers, and I thought, do you know what, Nicola, this is a sampler that maybe you can learn something from and give a home to. So this sampler is a record of various different stitches. So let's just start at the top. We have and the top is this crocheted lace work. You've got some ribbon binding, you've got some more crochet stitches to secure it, you've got the technique of binding the fabric, you've got cross stitch, you've got tent stitch there as well. You've got some more crochet work, and then as you go down you've got lots of drawn thread work, you've got different stitches being demonstrated there. We've got running stitch, we've got double running stitch, we've got a seam that has been joined there, that is a seam. And then as we work our way down we've got various other stitches, and again that's a seam join, that's a seam join, and she's joining fabric, and she's also pulling threads in this to do some drawn thread work. There's so many different techniques in this sampler, it makes it very interesting to study. So though this is a give a home to, it's a sampler that I'm going to learn from as well. And then at the bottom, we have where she stitched it, and it was a school, and it was worked in 1885. There we are. Ray goes, what did you buy that for? I said, I've given it a home. It's one of those little girls that needs a home. So anyway, okay, seem to have gone round things in a funny way today, but there we are. Anyway, next week, although I won't be here, I have pre-recorded a video for you for next weekend, and in next Sunday's video I will be revealing the Queen of the May. The Queen of the May would normally be sort of May Day, which is the Monday, but it's going to be the Sunday. I'll be in Cincinnati at my workshop for the Queen City Sampler Guild, and what more perfect place to release the Queen of the May at the Queen City Sampler Guild. That's a little treat for the attendees of my workshop. I'm not sure what time I will release the video. For UK people it's going to be quite late in the evening because obviously there's a big time difference. I'll probably release the video either in the lunch hour or at the end of my teaching day on the Sunday. So it will be out of timing, but it'd be well worth looking out for, because it is the Queen of the May for 2024 plus another beautiful sampler. Until a fortnight when I'll be back here doing a video that isn't pre-recorded, stay well, stay safe. Bye-bye.